2, or if you haven't watched part 1 and you're just watching this, how to make a matrix mold. So today we're going to be molding this that we did for correcting a life cast, and we'll be doing it as a matrix mold. So when you have something like this and you're wanting to make a mold of it, there's several different options that you can go with. We already discussed Alginate, which is basically the same as life casting, which I know we haven't done a tutorial on yet, but I will have that coming up probably before too long. I'll teach you guys how to do some life casting. You have silicone, which is a fantastic option, not a cheap one, but it's a good one, which is what I would recommend, because then you can do as many pulls out of it as you want, unless you're only needing one, in which case then, you know, it may be a little over the top, a little unnecessary. But with your silicone, there's two options. You can do what's called a layup mold, and you can do what's called a matrix mold. And I'll go over the differences with you now. So we've got two different options here. This one is a matrix mold, obviously not of this face. And this is a matrix mold, which actually, this is a layup mold, which actually is of the face that we're doing it. You can actually see it's the same face. In fact, this is the mold that I pulled that 1630 core out of. And if you look at this mold, it has a weird dents around the outside of it. That is, as we were talking in correcting a life cast, different options we have for molding. You can actually lay a flange around it and put some keys. And then if you wish to just bring this to this point here, then it's just as the core that we made before. But if you want to take it up and over the top, you actually end up with a piece that looks like this, which you can sculpt onto, and you don't have to worry necessarily about any keys on the face, because you've got your keys up and around the outside of it, which will lock it in. The only reason I don't like doing this is that I'm going to be pouring it up out of 1630. This flange, this is made out of fiberglass, so it's rigid and strong, and doesn't have to be very thick, but the 1630 is going to have to be probably this thick, so it becomes a little excessive and wastes a bit of material. So that's the only thing I don't really like about it. But you can make these keys bigger or smaller. I mean, it really doesn't matter. Sometimes people just put negative keys in because they don't like having this here in case they're trying to sculpt and it gets in the way. That's definitely an option. But you know, this is what I was talking about. So you have your keys in the flange around the outside, so your face can be clear of any touch points, and you can sculpt all the way back, all the way around, if that's what you want to do. So let's look at these two different molds, different options that we have. First is the layup option. So if we pull this out, this is the mold, and this is what's called a mother mold, or a case. So the mother mold, because it cradles the silicone. If you didn't have the mother mold there, it would just flop around and it would be distorted, and it's not going to provide us with an accurate casting from the mold. So if you look at this one, you can see quite clearly that it's not very smooth. Basically what I did was I put a flange, I built a wall around, just like we did with our other molds. And then I poured some over the top, just like we did with the 1630 layup mold, and it sort of pulled down in here and created this flange here. And then basically I thickened up some silicone, scooched it on, smoothed it as best I could with some alcohol, and then I got some bits of silicone that I poured up in a little channel, and just basically pushed them into the wet silicone and let it dry. Then did my mother mold over the top of it, and you end up with a brush up mold. These are certainly very common. They're fairly convenient. There's not a lot of screwing around with them. The only problem is that there's a couple of things that you need to understand about these. Firstly, you can get delamination. If for some reason when you put your thickened batch on, if there's a little gap, it won't stick. Maybe there was some alcohol or something on the surface and again it doesn't stick, then you're going to end up with your surface peeling off, and it's going to ruin your mold. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. There's always the risk of that, of having air bubbles or whatever. Secondly is that that sometimes you can't, if you look here, I'm not sure if you can see how it's kind of clear there. You can't always guarantee the thickness is going to be even. So it is harder to gauge once you've got that thickened silicone on, and then you have to go in with a little needle and sort of poke it in and measure it that way, and it just becomes an issue. And sometimes your keys won't stick properly. It's mostly stuff to do with the different layers sticking to themselves and whether it's going to weaken your silicone or not. So that's your brush up mold. I use them quite a lot. They do take a couple of days, because the silicone, depending on what you're using, if you're using, this is Mold Max 30 by Smooth On, it takes, I think, 12 hours for it to fully set up. I could be wrong on that, but I think from memory it's about 12 hours. Whereas a matrix mold, you do one pour of your silicone and it's done, whereas this takes, your print coat, wait for it to set. Your thickened thing, wait for it to set. Then you do your mother mold. Whereas with a matrix mold, we can do it all pretty much in one sitting and then walk away. And then as soon as the silicone's set, we're good to go. So what makes a matrix mold different? Well, firstly, your silicone is a lot stronger. There's no delamination because it's all poured up out of the same batch. There's nothing trying to stick to itself, or it's just gives you a much nicer, more even coating of silicone. You can really control how thick your silicone is. It's just a better quality mold. There's a couple things that are very obvious on a mother mold of a matrix mold. That is, there's usually some kind of a pour hole in the middle, and then if you look, usually there's a bunch of little what are called sprue holes or bleeder holes, which we saw on one of our other molds that we had bleeder holes. These ones are to make sure the silicone doesn't trap any air when we're pouring it up. So if you were to pull the silicone out of a matrix mold, most matrix molds will have this kind of crisscross pattern in them. Now this mother mold's made out of the epoxy and syntactic dough and fiberglass, just like our other syntactic molds, and then I put the feet on so it's nice and stable. It's light, and then there's the silicone. So most of the time you'll find that matrix molds will have this sort of crisscross, because what it does is it actually locks the silicone down in, so you get a much more predictable cast out of it. And then I've got these things here, receivers here, to hold that silicone in. And it's just a matter of working your fingers down to push the silicone back into all of those little grooves so it locks into the mother mold nicely, so that it is very, very predictable. And if you watch the one with Correcting a Life cast, we were talking about possibly if you wanted to sculpt something that has the prosthetic covering the eyes. This is an example of that. You can see that it's got these domes over the eyes. So anything I pull out of this is going to have a build-up of like a little dome over the eyes so that they can open their eyes inside the prosthetic. It's great if you wanted to do something where it looks like the eye socket is has been gouged out, so you don't have any eyeballs in there. I did a film once where they wanted eyeless demons, and so I sculpted the whole face forward about a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch, and then sculpted some eyelids and just painted black on the eyes underneath, and it just looked like there was just no eyes there. They didn't want to have to go to the expense of CGI, removing the eyes, so it worked really well. So that's also an option for correcting a life cast if you wanted to have something like that. So this is the matrix mold. Today for the matrix mold we're going to be making our jacket out of Ultracal 30, just because it's fast. At a later date I can always put the core back inside it, or run a core in it, remove the jacket, and then put a new jacket over the top, because the core inside it will provide stabilization for the silicone so that it's still going to be accurate. So we can always go ahead and replace this jacket later if I wanted, but with this new corrected life cast I probably won't use this one too much anymore, because this has all of the inherent undercuts in it. So I would much rather sculpt on that one, which has all of the corrections done. So let's get started in the claying up of a matrix mold. So we're going to need a few things. Firstly, we're going to need some paper towel. Got some paper towel here. We're going to need our clay. This is just wet clay, it's just a water clay. And we're going to need our clay cutter and some knives and sticks and stuff. Some tools for cleaning up the edges. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to sculpt the silicone part first. So your matrix mold, you always make a jacket first. So we're going to sculpt the clay on here to be exactly what we want our silicone to be. We can gauge the thickness using our clay cutter, make sure it's nice and even. We can put all of our keys that'll lock it in, and then basically we go straight on that. We make our jacket, remove the jacket, clean the clay out, put the jacket back on, and then we fill it, and it'll just basically fill in the void that was left by the clay. So that's how we do it. So we're going to just I guess get started, and I'll explain what's happening as we go. First thing I want to do is to actually give this a quick coat of mold release. And then we're going to take our paper towel and we're going to put it down. Now this stage probably is not as important when you're molding something hard like this, but if you're going to be doing a matrix mold of something you've sculpted, then you definitely are going to want to put a barrier between your sculpt and the water clay. So what this does is it just gives us that little bit of a barrier and protects our sculpt. It also makes it so that we don't have to really clean the residue of the water clay off the thing that we're molding, because that also is pain having to do that. Okay, we've got this piece here. Just going to go ahead and just place that on. That can hold it all kind of in place. I'm kind of pushing down a little bit on the nose. This is going to be a thin spot, but we run that strip over the top, so it's not going to have a problem. It'll have that thicker sort of key on top of it, so it's not going to be an issue that we have to deal with. So as you can see, I haven't made the silicone super thick. I don't want to waste a bunch of silicone, and because it's going to be very even, that alone will give it a strength. Plus we'll have the lattice kind of running over it, which also will provide it with strength. So just take off our crusts. Forgot to do that on that top one, but it's alright, we'll be able to fix that. Okay, so I just kind of eyeball it. The more you do it, the easier the eyeballing gets to sort of be able to fit pieces together. So I'm just lining that up here, making sure that's straight along the bottom, and then using the knife I'm just kind of following where the other one was there. If you miss a little bit, you can always just trim it, and any gaps you can just fill in with the scraps. Well, as I said, the more you do this kind of claying and stuff, the closer you're going to be able to get to piecing these things together quite easily. Just put a tiny bead in along there. And I'm thinking that we're going to be able to make this work just with one more slice, and then we'll just use these scraps to fill in around it. Then we'll sponge it all down, get it nice and even, then we'll be able to just going to remove that corner. Now it's going to feel weird because putting it over the paper towel makes it a little springy, so you can see that I can kind of push down on it. It's not totally solid, which is a little weird to get used to at first. Take our damp sponge. I'm not too worried about the sponge marks on this. It really doesn't matter. Okay, so now it's nicely smoothed down. Just gonna just slightest little bit more thicker for the keys. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to thin it back down to where it was. Okay. And I'm going to just throw a flange around this to help lock it into the mother mold. Okay, so we've got 6 strips now. Just going to nose around the outside here. Now it's also important that you don't mush them with your fingers. You want to try and keep them as clean and flat and nice as you can. And remember, don't try and force these together. We can always go back in and add little triangles to fill those, which will make for a much stronger clay up. See what I'm doing here. Yeah, that might help. I know you guys have seen me clay stuff up a few times by now, so now you understand the process involved, but I guess it doesn't hurt to watch it one more time. Again, I always like molding on a turntable. Oops. Carelessness there on my part. Flange. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to cut some little kind of triangular bases, shapes in this. Now, the reason we've done them like this is because the material for the mother mold will flow in here and that will lock the silicone into the mother mold so it's not going to move, which is what we want. And we'll just go ahead and it's hard not to do it so that it's the other way around. It's always kind of a little tricky for me to remember which way to do these. Because I'm a little OCD, I kind of do each side, each one on either side, so that I know that I'm going to have the same number and they're going to be approximately in the same place so that it looks balanced. I don't bevel this, I just do it pretty much just straight. So I'm just going to do a little clean up, try and get these edges as clean as I can. Alright, so they're all in place. I'm just going to wrap all of this scrap clay, throw it into a bag laid up. Now I want our keys to be a little bit thicker than that, just so that you know, locking them in takes a little bit more pressure, so it holds them in place. So yeah, it's a little bit, maybe it's probably what we had plus 50%. There's no real rules for how thick they should be. It's just whatever you feel. Okay, so I'm going to use this as my guide for my keys. I always kind of start with the spine. Wow, and that just happened to be perfect length. I don't think that that's ever happened like that before. Usually the topmost part here is where we're going to put the pour hole, so I like to have the kind of ribs, for want of a better word, the cross ones, all sort of gathering at that point there so that it helps the flow. It means we're going to have to come in, just cut a tiny little piece to fit in there, but that's neither here nor there. I want to make sure there's no little gap in between there for the stuff to flow into. it's just a matter of going in and filling up all of the little gaps, making sure there's no gaps between this part and these keys. Now if you screw up and miss some, you can fix it afterwards. So don't be too distraught if you miss one. But it's easier to clean it up to clay form than to take the mother mold and start chiseling bits away or dremeling bits away, or whatever would be necessary to get that to where you want it to be. Now you want to make sure that you don't, as you're doing this, you're not digging into your first covering with a big score, because that'll make your silicone have a groove where it's thinner, almost like a perforation. If it's going to tear when you're pulling it out, that's a spot that it'll tear. Alright. Running it over with the brush just to kind of clean it all up. Then I'll hit it with the sponge just to smooth it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call that done. And now good coat of crystal clear. Okay, so I'm going to wait for that to dry. I think I'm going to probably put another 2 or 3 coats on. It really doesn't matter at this point about building up a thickness, because anything that we add to it is just going to be more silicone, and it's only going to be such a negligible amount. It's only when you're dealing with cutting edges and those types of things that it becomes an issue. So I'm going to do that, a couple more coats of that, and then I'll be back and we'll keep going. So we're all set and ready to go. Before we do anything though, I do want to use some of our trusty Ease Release 200 just to give this a quick once over. I have been kind of bitten by my silicone sticking to my Ultracal in the past. So I want to make sure that's not going to happen again. Okay, so we've got water. We've got our slop bucket here. That's just for washing brushes, rinsing off hands and stuff. Got some cut strips of burlap or hessian, depending where you are in the world. And we got a bucket for mixing in. I've got our Ultracal 30 down on the floor in a big tub. I'm not going to lift that up for you to see because it's heavy. Now I'm going to put, I guess, about an inch of water in the bottom of that. So you can see there's about an inch, and then I'm just going to add some Ultracal. Now you want to mix this so that it becomes the consistency of kind of like a whipping cream. We want it to be runny, but we don't want it to be really runny. We want it to be kind of thick, but still able to be brushed on. So make sure there's no lumps or chunks in it. Okay, so you can see that that's kind of, it's still runny. You still get all the detail, but it doesn't just run off when you put it on an angle. So that's about perfect for what we need. So I'm just going to take my brush, zoom in for you on this so you can see what we're doing. Basically we're just brushing this in, brushing it into here. Now it's really important that this case goes all the way to the board, not to the edge of the clay like normally. Normally we just do stuff to the edge of the clay, but because we have to actually create a seal that's not going to leak silicone all over the floor, we definitely want it to go all the way to the board. And we're actually going to have to change boards as well, because I just sprayed mold release all over this all over this sculpt, and it went all over the board as well. So we're going to have to change it out for a new board. Okay, so we've got the whole thing now is under stone. So now what we want to do is make sure that all those keys that we put into that flange are filled, and we want to get rid of any big steps, because when we put the burlap on, we don't want the burlap to have to sort of go around all of this detail. We want it to just kind of sit in, just lay across the top. So it's kind of like the fiberglass in that it doesn't want to necessarily bend all the way around, and now, it doesn't have to be totally flat, but you do definitely want to get rid of any really sharp little turns and bumps. So we're just kind of running some down here. You can kind of make a little ramp that will make it much easier to lay stuff into. we're going to be laying essentially cloth over this. We want to make sure that there's no peaks and no sort of deep valleys that that will create areas where the burlap is not in contact with the print coat. If there's a big peak, pointy bit, it'll sit like a tent, and we don't want that. We want to make sure that it is as smooth as possible and as easily able to take the burlap. Now the part that goes onto the board past the thing, we're going to end up, at the end, we're going to end up grinding that all off. So I'm not too worried about how neat that is, but you probably want to try and just kind of keep it as manageable as possible. We don't want to have it, you know, kind of 3 inches wide. We just basically need to be able to pinch off the edges so that the silicone isn't going to leak out. So. Okay, I'll call that done for the moment. Now if I put my finger on that, see how it kind of peaks up, creates like, you know, like it peaks up. What we want is we want to wait until that is set enough that when I touch it, it doesn't automatically peak up like that. And that's when we know that it's... I'm going to put some water in this, just try to stop it setting in there. There's not too much left in there, but I'll slow that down. Okay, and now we wait. Alright, so you can see that a lot of the real wet shine has gone off it. If I touch it with my finger, it just leaves a fingerprint. It doesn't actually peak up the Ultracal like it was before. So that's how we know that this is at least firm enough that it's not going to be disturbed by putting the other stuff on. And that's what we want. So we've got our water here that still has a tiny bit of the Ultracal left in it. I'm going to go ahead and add some more to that. We want this just a tiny bit less viscous, tiny bit runnier than last time. So So you can see it still hangs a little bit, but most of it will run off. That's because we want it to be able to permeate into the burlap. So I'm going to dip the burlap in. Doing that 2 at a time. And I want to leave a fairly good coat on there so that it will sort of fill any little gaps. And just lightly making sure that that's all the way against the base print coat. Remember again that we want to make sure that we're sort of blending out the edges on those. Do another one. Going to double this one over. Run it down the top. Make sure we're gently but firmly pressing that all the way down, and I'm just going to run that around like that. Now if you buy your burlap on a roll, I buy mine from Home Depot on a roll that's exactly this width, and then I just cut it into bits and pieces, and that's the most convenient way that I've found. But if you buy it in a big sheet, I would strongly recommend cutting it diagonally against the grain, so that way, rather than it being sort of... Okay, so I apologise, my battery ran out on my camera, so we missed just putting these last little end caps on, but luckily we got most of the rest of it. So we just make sure that everything has at least a coating of a doubled up piece of burlap. Some parts, like through here, has 4. Some parts through here have maybe 6 where they've overlapped, and then I've put that cap on the end. But on the whole, we want to make sure that everything has some reinforcement to it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mix up another batch of Ultracal, but this time it's going to be super thick, and it's going to be almost like a clay, and then we'll be able to just finish that all down and make sure that it's nice for your hands, so that you're not having lumps and bits and pieces. So when you add the water to this mix, just make sure you pull out any bits of burlap that have come off the other thing, the pieces. So you can see how thick that is. Then I'm just going to kind of now, something you'll notice about the Ultracal is that if you jiggle it, see how it becomes liquid and just runs off? So you want to make sure that you're not jiggling things around, because it's kind of like quicksand, and that movement will make it runny, and you'll end up just chasing it and chasing it and chasing it and chasing it. It'll drive you crazy. Going to mix up a little bit more, because we need to throw it a little bit flat on the bottom or on the top. Just a tiny little handful of water in there. This is quite thick. So Now if you watched our molding with syntactic dough tutorial, you'll notice that this is not too dissimilar from the when we put the dough on. See how that's kind of sagging from jiggling that board. Just going to make sure that we have enough over the edge of our clay flange. So I'm just going to put a little bit extra here. As I said, we'll just grind it off anyway at the very end, but don't want it to snap off and then have a big hole. You can always clay it in with some water clay, but a bit of sag there, so just gonna use a serrated kidney to now the kidney's not going to jiggle it nearly as much as my hand was, so I find that I might have a bit more success with that. Stuff we put on the top to make it flat is what's causing the problems. Just too much of it. It was too heavy, and it was starting to sag down the sides. So go ahead and just remove some of that until this is set up a bit more. here I'm just using my palms just to try and bring this up here, stop that sag. This is just a round kidney, just to get rid of those serration marks. Some people like to leave those on there because they give a grip for the hands. I am not really one of those people that likes to do that because I think they look ugly. See a lot of people with online tutorials, and they're throwing stone molds, but the molds just look so awful. You know, they're just lumpy and bumpy and just kind of crappy looking. They're not nice for your hands when you're handling them. They don't look pretty. To make a mold that looks pretty takes about 5 minutes longer. Well, that might be an exaggeration, maybe 10 minutes longer. And to make one that's ugly. So right now I'm just looking at acidity areas. Like I can see on this side it kind of concaves in, so it doesn't match. So I'm just kind of trying to add some without creating a sag, which is the challenge. As you can see that every time I move the Ultracal, it's wanting to sag on me. But I will triumph. And the more this thickens up, the more we'll be able to just kind of manhandle it without having it start to sag. In fact, what I might do is pull out the serrated kidney again and kind of round this off. And everything on here from about here down is going to get ground off in the end, so And we're kind of rounding this up and over, we're stopping that sag from happening. And then what I'll do is I'll just go in at the last minute when this is sufficiently sag proof and throw some extra on there and flatten it off. I will be doing a series on working with Ultracal 30, just like I did with the 1630. Because it is actually a very good material. It used to be the staple for effects work. Almost all the molds used to be made out of Ultracal 30 back in the day, and now it's not hard enough. It's not the same as it used to be. I'm going to use my round kidney to just smooth the finish down a little bit. So those serration marks are all but gone. Just pop a couple of little feet on, just to give us our flat base. There's a little dip down here I noticed with my, when I was running my kidney around, I noticed there's a little dip there where it, okay, so this is starting to get warm, which means it's starting to cure nicely. As it starts to set up, you want to just keep rubbing on it and rubbing on it and rubbing on it, and what that does is it makes it very, very smooth. And once it gets to a certain point, you're going to find that you'll get like a powdery residue on the surface, and you can use that, and it kind of sands it down and makes it very smooth, very nice finish. So if you look carefully, you see it's got this sort of powderiness to it now. That's what we want to use to be able to just finish this all down nicely. This is actually the step that a lot of people will skip because they're in too much of a hurry. But it actually gives you very, very pretty Ultracal molds. The outside surface looks really nice. Okay, I think we've buffed that down enough. I think that's going to be fine. Make sure that that's still flat enough. It's got it. No, it's okay. So I've left it for a while. It's now totally cured, and it's time to open it up. So I'm just going to chisel off just a tiny bit of this super thin stuff. I don't want to necessarily have it so thin, but I don't want to chisel off enough that it goes down into the silicone. But I do need to be able to have some kind of a not a super blended pointy edge. I need to have somewhat of a upright edge so that we can hot glue it down and then clay it so that the silicone doesn't escape. Okay, I'm just going to very carefully get this in underneath. Okay. And there's our sculpt. Pretty much still intact. Yeah. Yep. There's just that one, oops, and apparently my thumbnail right then. The rest of it is all still in pretty good condition. We can definitely work with that. You can see that the paper towel did its job. Now it's just a matter of cleaning out all of the clay, which should largely come out clean because of all of the crystal clear I put on it and the mold release. So it should be not too difficult to just peel all of this out. See how easily that's and how cleanly that's coming out. Which is good. That's what we want. So now I am going to, where's my marker gone? Oh, there it is. I'm going to run over to the grinder, and I'm going to grind this all down to this line. I grind it all down to that line, and that way we've not got such a large sort of sprawling amount sort of coming off. So I'll be back when that's all ground off. I don't think that you guys need to watch me do it. You've seen me grind stuff down. It's, you know, you don't really need to see it again. You've watched it in probably 2 or 3 tutorials by now. So I'll just take care of this and then I'll come back. We're done with the grinding, and you see that's a nice clean edge all the way around, which will be great. Next thing that we've got to do is to figure out how we're going to put the silicone in there. You'll notice that as I was grinding this, I just turned this upside down for a red hot second just to flatten that out a little bit more nicely. So there are a few options that we have. I know that there are some friends of mine who will get a 2-litre soda bottle, and what they do is, I guess for want of a better example, we'll use this empty alcohol bottle. We'll just imagine that this isn't a flip-top lid, that it's just a regular lid. And what they'll do is, when they're making their jacket, they'll actually put this down and make the jacket around it so that it locks it in. And then what they do is they cut the bottom out of this, and then just I have a little alcohol still in it, and then just screw that in and use that as a funnel to pour the silicone into, and it drains straight down in there. So that's definitely one option that we have. The other option we have is to make sure this is really flat. Get a big fat, like 3 or 4 inch tube. Make sure that we have a hole that size, hot glue it around, and then just fill it and let it pour down. It's another option that we have. The option that I'm going to go for is a little more involved, but I think it works well. So what I've got is this kind of little contraption here that I've made. So it's bits of PVC. Just get this hot glue off it. Some PVC. You can see in here that I've used some of that plumber's epoxy, and I've made it into a funnel, and then I've put a coupler on top, and then what we can do is just get some this, put that in there like that. So now all we need to do is attach it there, and now that's basically the same thing as using the bottle, but it's a little nicer, and I've used this for quite a bit. You can see on here that I've written tin only because I pour a lot of silicone. Sometimes it's platinum, sometimes it's tin, and the platinum, if I pour it into the tin, the residue from the tin silicone will cause cure inhibition and cause problems for it. So let's plan this out. So we're going to use this high point here as the point of injection or whatever. And then we need to think about everywhere that it could trap air as it starts to fill up. So usually what I like to do is I'll put one sort of about here, about there and there. Now this isn't necessarily to avoid air trap. What this is it lets me know how far up the mold the silicone is. Let's put a little hole here, 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 just so we make sure we get those corners. And these are going to have to be on a funny angle because if I just drill straight through, it's just going to drill into here. So I'm going to have to drill these out on an angle. Let's put another one here and another one here. I think we're in good shape with that. So this first hole is just a pilot hole. So as you can see, it's just a pilot hole because I've got this piece of PVC that I cut. And as you can see, I just took the grinder and went and just tapered it down so that when we cut a hole, we'll cut it so that we can just sort of pop that in there, and it'll just stay in there, and then that will allow us to pop this on top. So, or we can just take that out, just put that straight onto it, which will be actually better. It'll reduce the bottleneck there. So I've got this 13/16 paddle bit. Excuse me, my voice is going funny. And that pilot hole, you can see, just fits that little bit there. Okay. We are all the way through. You can see that that's sitting in there pretty nicely, and we can just kind of give that a hammer in. What I might do, actually, because I think because this is so thin, I'm going to grind that down a little bit. I'll do that later, so that when we hammer it in, it's not going to be sticking down into the silicone. So if you look here, you'll see that that's actually protruding into the inside of where the silicone is going to need to be. And although this is quite a thick part, I'd like to avoid having that be as much in there as much as it is. So if I can even get it, there we go. So I'll just grind the tip of that down about a 1/4 inch, and that'll be perfect. And so now it's just a matter of putting in our sprue holes. Get a little starter going. Handle. believe is going to miss that. Yep, there we go. This one I think is right on that foot. So I think I'm going to have to move it up and just angle it a little bit. Okay. And now it's just a matter of putting popping a hole on each of those dots. Well, that's not wanting to drill through. Are we through? Yes, we are through. Okay, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to pop a hole in each of these points we marked. It's going to be very boring for you guys to sit and watch me drill about 20 holes. So I'll be back when we're done. I made some adjustments from our original plan. So you can see that there's originally meant to be a hole there, but I moved it to here to avoid that foot. I think I did that when we were on camera. It was originally meant to be a hole there. I was finding this one was right on that start bit where it starts to get thick, so I moved that one down about an inch so that I could get a better angle. And so each of these outside ribs, I just moved it down. You can see there's about an inch from where I had it marked. And then I added a closer one here. I added closer ones here, closer one there, and a closer one there to the bottom. So that way we've got a lot of airflow coming out of the mold, so it should help the silicone to be able to fill into the mold faster. If there's only a couple of little sprue holes, the silicone can only enter the mold as fast as the air can evacuate the mold. And so if we've got lots of sprue holes, we'll find that the silicone will be able to flow freely, and then as the silicone hits each of these sprue holes, we'll just plug it, and it'll just sort of fill and fill and fill, and then it'll hit the next sprue hole, and then the next sprue hole, and then the next sprue hole, and the next sprue hole, and we'll be able to kind of track where our silicone is in the mold. And then we should be good to go. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go and shove this in the oven for a little while just to dry it out a little bit. It's still feeling a little damp, and the hot glue is not going to want to stick to dry Ultracal. The other thing I'm going to do is, rather than try and relocate that corrected life cast, I'm just going to really clean off the board well with some alcohol to remove that, to remove all of that mold release that we put on. So I'm just going to scrub it down really well with alcohol all the way around, and I'm hoping that that's going to be enough to allow it to stick. But I will also take other extra precautions, like strapping that to the board with a mold strap and claying around it. So we'll have two redundancies to the hot glue in the clay, and also the mold strap holding it down. So I'm going to take care of all of that, and I'll see you when we get back. That's dried it off enough. Just going to take some of this mold release now. You do not want to get any mold release on this part here, only on the inside. That's only because I've had problems with the silicone not wanting to come out of Ultracal molds. in the past, so just always trying to be a bit more cautious now with that. Just move that out of the way till the fog subsides. Alright. So now we're going to very carefully, and I'm looking in the hole. Now, we know that the tip of the nose is the high point. So if you look down in there, you want to be able to see the tip of that nose there. That's how I know that it's pretty much centered in the jacket. What some people do is they'll trace a mark on the board before they remove it. But since I was going to grind some down, I didn't see the point in doing that, because it just would have been so far out, because I ground off about this much all the way around. I mean, I suppose it could have just given me a guide, just make sure that I bring it in enough, but this is a pretty good way. It's not ever led me astray yet. I ground this down like we had discussed and checked it, and now it looks fine. So I just need to just locate my hammer again. Got my hot glue gun. I'm just going to pop a bead just around there just to be on the safe side, and then we're going to just kind of hot glue that all the way. I cleaned the board down really well with alcohol, and then I actually got out some acetone and cleaned off a lot of the crystal clear buildup, which is a good way to make sure that I know that the mold release is gone, because it was sitting on top of the crystal clear. So if the crystal clear is not there anymore, I can be pretty certain that there's no more mold release on the board. Okay, so we've got that hot glue all the way around. And we're going to get some water clay. And I'm just going to kind of pack it just to ensure that it's all silicone tight. Oh. Accidentally filled in that sprue hole, which is what I was trying to avoid happening. Thinking of doing a tutorial on just making bits and pieces for your shop. Like, we'll go through in detail how to make that funnel thing. We'll go through how to make an injection gun, how to make, you know, just different bits and pieces that you'll, you know, need in your shop. Maybe a cheap oven to bake foam in. If any of you guys watching this think that that would be a good idea, just put a comment there just saying that you think that you'd like that, or if you think it would be a waste of time, just say no, don't bother about that, because I certainly don't want to waste my time doing it if it's not going to be of benefit to you guys. You know, another thing we could make is a way, like I've got that nice clay cutter. I had to special order that, and some places stock them, but a lot of places don't. And so we could cover how to make a sort of homemade clay cutter that'll give you several different thicknesses of clay. Okay, so that's all on there, and last but not least, wow, this mold strap has seen much better days. I think I'm going to find a different one. Here's one. Okay, so I got that on there pretty good, pretty tight. That on that. So we got our whole thing is clayed up and ready to pour. Okay, so we've got everything set up to mix our silicone now. I actually just need to get a stir stick. Mix it. Silicone is not the newest, so it's thickened up a little bit. I'm pretty sure that when we put the catalyst in, it'll reduce the viscosity quite a bit. Maybe I can. It's going to take forever. Oops, sorry. I'm aiming for around about 1,700 grams. So I might start with 1,500. Well, 1500 exactly. I have to put 150 grams of catalyst. And I looked it up. We were talking about earlier about the cure time of the Mold Max. I was actually off. It's 24 hours. So to do a brush up mold will take us 2 days, whereas this will just take us a day and a few hours. 150. And of course we want to keep mixing until we have no white visible at all. Any white streaks, silicone base that has not been catalyzed and will not cure. So we want to make sure that we scrape the sides down really well, scrape the bottom down really well. Now you can degas your silicone if you like. I'm not going to bother doing it today, just because I'm kind of a bit lazy. So I only really degas if I'm doing stuff with silicone that is like for prosthetics, or if I'm doing molds that are going to be clear and not very thick, then I worry about it. But I don't worry too much about it otherwise. I haven't really had too many problems with it. I know that's probably quite lazy of me, but I'm going to call that done. And I'm just going to do a high pour into here just to try and reduce as many air bubbles as I can. Mold Max 30 has a 45-minute pot life. Pot life means that's working time before it starts to thicken up and becomes unworkable. Okay, so that's look inside there. See that that's now quite full, and it's slowly going down. And that's the speed that the silicone is going to move at through that 2-inch pipe. Sometimes what I like to do is to just make sure the top's clear and then just blow down into it, just to increase the pressure. I know some people who've made a little cap with a hole and they'll blow compressed air in. And you can see just by doing that, it's gone down quite a bit. So that's, I've still got all of this to still put in there as well. So it's just as well it's got a 45-minute pot life. So I'm going to finish pouring this up, and I'll bring you back when we start seeing some sprue hole action on this thing. Okay, so if we look at these two sprue holes here, we see we've got a little bit of action going on with the silicone. So I'm just going to get a little ball of oil clay. I'm just going to give that a plug. Put some more, I can see going on down in this one. See some pink down in there, some down in here. So this one here's about to start bleeding, so I'm gonna plug that on. Here's another one down here. There. Another one here. There are some people who like to get a screw and they'll just basically screw that in there till it's snug. That now is not going to leak anymore, rather than using the clay. So it just really depends on what you prefer. Okay, this is ready for another pour. And this one looks like it's got some pink in there. Obviously the silicone's come down and it's flowed down the sides, so it's filled that in. We haven't got any bleeding around. There's one starting down here, so This one here's still got some stuff going in it, so I'm gonna just sit and keep pouring this in, and I'll come back periodically and fill you guys in with everything so you can see the progress. Sitting here watching silicone pour in over 40 minutes is going to be incredibly boring for you, so I'll just check back in a little bit when we've had some progress. Okay, well, that was an adventure. Sorry I didn't get back sooner. The silicone started thickening up too much to really be able to flow, so I had to make a makeshift plunger and plunge the silicone down in it, which it has now filled all of the sprue holes. But problem is that, as you can see, the pressure cracked our hot glue, and now it's starting to leak out through the clay. Now, having said that, that is not runny. I'm doubting very, very much if it's going to cause us really any problems, but I did pop an extra strap on there just to try and clamp this side down, which was the side that had more of the issues. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is full, since all of the sprue holes are now bleeding, and I'm going to leave this sit now for, I guess, the next 24 hours till it's cured, and then I'll come back and we'll be able to have a look at how it worked out. If you're faced with the same dilemma of old silicone that's a little bit thicker than you would like, you can get some silicone oil and thin it down a little bit. I made a matrix mold with this silicone about a month ago and it worked fine, but I'm wondering if the stuff on the very bottom was just a little bit thicker than the stuff that was, you know, a little bit further up in the thing. So alrighty, so I guess I'll see you in about 24 hours, and we'll pull this thing apart and see how it went. The little funnel, kind of, as I was messing around with it, kind of came loose, but normally what you do is you just kind of get it, bend it, and then just cut the silicone. There'd be a little silicone tube connecting the two, and you can just cut it. It's pretty easy. Let's get this open. There we go. So this side here, which was clamped down, it's fine. This side here, where it's got a little thicker, doesn't really matter. But to clean this out, peel out the crystal clear. You can see I did quite a solid build up of the crystal clear. And then that can all be cleaned out with some water once we get the crystal clear out. And it literally just scrapes off the silicone, because nothing really sticks to silicone except more silicone. Piece of burlap. This is just a chip brush that I've cut the bristles short on. There you have it. Okay, so pulled the silicone out. Now I'm just going through, just cutting off all of these little sprue hole bits, because they're going to make it nearly impossible to be able to put the silicone back in, because you're not going to be able to force them all the way down into that little thing, into the holes. I've also trimmed the edge, and I'm going to trim out these keys Then I'm going to take my jacket and I'm going to grind it all the way back so that this key here is flush with the silicone. So you'll see the silicone on the outside just to make it neater, and I think it'll be better. Now this will have a really tiny lip where it got a little over poured from when we, or when I, shouldn't include you guys in it, from when I forced the silicone down in there. It won't affect the mold at all. It was bothering me that that half of it you could see the keys and half of it you couldn't, so just kind of trimming all this excess off and it'll look a little more, bit more like even all the way around. Okay, so we should be able to just get that all back in there. There we have it. I'm going to go grind this jacket down. So look there, you can just see where it's just ever so slightly raised, which really won't affect the mold one bit in its function. And it doesn't look dreadful. Looks better than having half of this all solid silicone and half not. So I'm going to grind that down and then we'll have the finished piece. So we've ground it all down. There's just some little bits and pieces like this that I'm just kind of cleaning up. Fine. And when you put the silicone back in, you want to avoid getting any chunks of anything down in there, because it will prevent the silicone from sitting into the case mold properly. Okay, so what's left for us to do is to mark it up and we're done. Clean this clay off. So this mold is Mr. White. And it's corrected. And this was 2017. And there we go. That's ready to be run. I'm going to be running a core out of that today. And that's one matrix mold complete. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.